Greetings folks and welcome to the Electromaker Show. I'm once again a little bit sick, unfortunately, but I did not want that to stop me from getting a show out. So we have got a bunch of good stuff to cover this week and let's get going. Up first this week, a project from the Raspberry Pi subreddit, and this is apparently someone's first project at 19 years old, and it's pretty impressive. Now, I've seen a handful of these Rubik's Cube solvers around, and they scale up in complexity, but even this, which is sort of the most simple way of doing it, having various motors grabbing each element of the Rubik's Cube and spinning it in order to solve it, is still pretty complicated. Now, what's happening here is the person that has made this jumbles up the cube and then gives each face of the cube into the Raspberry Pi. The program calculates the moves it will need in order to solve the cube, and then it will solve it. And it is based on the Koshimba library, the Koshimba. Either way, this is a library which basically has the solve algorithm for Rubik's Cubes. And it's not something that I've really spent much time looking into. I know a little bit about it because I used to live with someone who was obsessed with Rubik's Cubes and used to do that trick where they would look at a cube and then solve it with their eyes closed, which is a great party trick. But the reason that works is because there is cube notation, as you can see here. And this shows you what each face of the cube is known as. The facelet positions of the cube, as it says here. And the letters stand for up, left, front, right, back, and down. And once you've given each face of the Rubik's Cube into the program, it will spit out a solution string. And this explainer of the solution strings here says how they work. Essentially, if it mentions a face, you have to turn that face clockwise 90 degrees. And if it mentions a face with an apostrophe, it is counterclockwise 90 degrees. And if there is the number 2, you turn the face 180 degrees. Which is exactly what this robot is doing. But what is going on under the hood is actually, in my opinion, possibly less impressive than the hardware it took to build this. This is a very solid looking design. And for a first project at 19 years old, it is fantastic. So yeah, this is from user Couldn't Tell You Mate, which reminds me a lot of home. Yeah, I'll leave a link to it in the description of this video. Moving over to the Arduino subreddit, user ThonLabs, who also has a YouTube channel known as ThonLabs, has made some sound-sensitive clams, which are these little 3D printed boxes with lights in them and a solenoid, which react to sound and snap shut. And when I first saw this, I thought this must be some kind of quite clever low-power IoT mesh kind of thing, and it's not. It's way simpler than that, and it's actually super clever. Let's watch a second of it, and then I'll explain.
So this is me on the beach playing around with what I refer to as sound-sensitive light clamps. They're designed to close immediately when scared by loud noises. When one clamp closes, the sound of it makes all the other ones close as well, making them act like a swarm.
The video goes on to show how he sort of theory crafted this idea in Blender and went through building it. And each clam is essentially a relatively simple thing. It's just done in a very nice way. Inside each of the 3D printed clams there is a solenoid and a little IC along with a microphone for sensing sound. And when it senses sound over a certain threshold, it will snap shut. The power in which the clam snaps shut, because solenoids can be pretty powerful, is loud enough to make all the clams around it snap shut as well. This is a lovely way of doing it. In a world where we're all so used to everything having some kind of ESP32 chip in it or whatever, it's a really nice way of approaching it. And funnily enough, this isn't the first time I have come across the intersection of clams and maker tech in order to create art. But before moving on to that, just quickly, this highlights exactly what I was saying about how it's actually a relatively simple PCB. You can see there that this is where the IC is attached, obviously, and there's some LEDs running around it, along with the solenoid. And simplicity is not a bad thing whatsoever. In fact, it is always to be applauded. Whether you're coding or making something with hardware, the simpler it is to do, the easier it'll be to debug when you inevitably get it wrong the first time. But as I said, this work immediately made me think of another piece of work which is sort of similar in a way by the artist Marco Baratti, who lives here in Berlin. And this is also using clams, also using sensors, but rather than using sound sensor data, it uses water purity sensor. And it uses the readings from a water purity sensor to change the sound the speakers in each of the 3D printed clams makes. So both of these ideas are linked obviously by the fact that they are clams, but also the fact that they use technology to create some kind of artistic expression. I will link the Marco Baratti project in the description, because that's definitely worth checking out. Slight side note here, I worked on a project recently which was actually going to have Marco Baratti as a part of it. The clams were going to be there, and for the water sensor data, he was going to stick the water sensor in the Spree, which is the river that runs through Berlin, which unfortunately couldn't happen because of the pandemic, but that's why it was so close to the front of my mind. But I will link that in the description, and I will of course link the fantastic and very thorough video from Thon Labs in the description as well. And by the way, Thon Labs is another channel which appears to be very, very active with lots of very cool projects, and yet only has 52 subscribers. So yeah, let's see if we can add a few to those numbers.
Hello, and as I make a noise, they close immediately.
Moving on from 3D printing for art's sake to something which is very prescient at the moment for people living in certain parts of the world. Specifically the west coast of America, where their air quality has dropped significantly due to the rampant fires over there. And this is someone who has noted that all the air purifiers were sold out, so designed and printed their own. The post from user Made What Now is in the 3D printing subreddit, and as well as the images of the print itself, there is a little further information about the project here. And of course there are links to the actual STL files on both Thingiverse and Prusa printers, which is a site I'm not as familiar with, but presumably they are exactly the same. And as someone who's never lived in countries where air purifiers or air conditioning or anything like that has really been a thing, I find this one sort of interesting because it's never even occurred to me to need an air purifier. But then of course I've never lived somewhere where large swathes of the countryside around me are on fire. So if this is relevant to you, or even if it is not, it's definitely something worth looking into, and I will link it in the description of the video. Up next, a project called MakerHand, which is from a guy called Andrej Dukic, and it is designed to be an open source prosthetic hand with a very, very low bill of materials that is created via 3D printing. Now, the accompanying video already shows that the prototype that he has working is already capable of some pretty amazing stuff. And given that the bill of materials is supposed to be under $30 for this, that's actually quite astounding. Prosthetics are not cheap whatsoever, and especially given that in some parts of the world people are expected to pay for these themselves without any kind of medical cover, this is an incredibly worthy project of your attention, I would say. Andrej also has a YouTube channel which features a few other clips of the arm in use, and yeah, it is incredible the level of stuff that it can do, with some quite fine-grained motion required. It's very easy to take for granted things like, for example, using scissors or screwing in a light bulb, and yet the video shows exactly this happening. So I will link in the description this initial Reddit post, but I would like to also point out, just in case you missed the link, that if you do like this project and you do want to support it, there is a way you directly can, and that is using Andrej's Patreon. We haven't really covered Patreon accounts on this show much because it's very difficult to choose who's worthy of actually receiving our sort of support and saying, yes, you should go and give money to these people. And I'm not necessarily saying that, but if you are compelled to help this project, there is a way that you can do it, and it is through this Patreon page. But either way around, whether you want to support the project or just want to see a very, very cool example of a prosthetic hand, the Maker Hand is definitely something to keep an eye on, as I'm sure it is going to have a lot of updates, and you'll be hearing a lot more about it in the coming weeks and months. Up next, a Raspberry Pi networking solution, which is just a little bit more streamlined than some of the other ones I've seen. This uses the USB on-the-go feature of the Raspberry Pi 4, and as you can see from the video here, it just opens a VNC client on the Mac as soon as it is up and running. So I found this on the Home Lab subreddit, and user Mr. Potshot goes into a little detail as to the idea behind this and why it was created in the post here. And I can completely understand if some of you see this and just think, what's the big deal? And that's probably because you don't have to do this several times a day, every day. As they mentioned here, this is something that happens in the field, and they just wanted to have be able to access a Pi in the car without a million wires. And that seems like a very good solution. Whenever something like this does come up, the first thing we all should be thinking is, how can I use code and the knowledge that I have to make this job easier for me? There is a GitHub page for the project if you want to look into it yourself. I haven't really looked into it to see whether it works on anything except a MacBook, although I imagine that's something you can fiddle with yourself to get working. But as it says here, simply it automatically hands out a DHCP address, so you don't have to fiddle with the setting one yourself. And when the interface comes up, a listener on the Mac will automatically launch the VNC session. Yes, it's time for the mystery box competition. In short, this is a box of mystery. There are things in it that you can win. If you comment on a video, you will be entered automatically into the competition to win whatever I pull out of the box by doing this. Analog devices. So this is some kind of evaluation kit from Analog Devices, but I don't know anything else other than that. What are you? CN0357 Shield Evaluation Board. All right, hold on, I need a sec. Okay, this is super, super cool. I looked at this for a while before noticing that it said carbon monoxide on that little thing, and then it occurred to me, of course, that's what this is. This is a carbon monoxide and other toxic gas detector. It's designed to be a header that fits onto an Arduino. It fits regular Arduino Uno pins. And yeah, this is a programmable toxic gas sensor header for Arduino, and presumably other things as well. I had never come across this before, hence me looking very confused at it, but this is super, super cool. So yeah, if you have an Arduino Uno and you left a comment on the video next week, one of you will be winning this, but let's find out exactly who that is. And the winner of this kind of unique Analog Devices Arduino hat is Don Core. We'll be in touch with you as to how we can get this out to you. And yeah, this is one of the more unique things that we've given away, at least to me. I'd never really messed with the idea of toxic gas sensors before. And as well as it being Arduino HAT compatible, having a quick look on the internet makes it seem like there's a lot of other ways that you can work with this thing as well. There are some materials in the box that will be coming with this, Don. And if you do need any more information, I'll happily point you in the right direction after the fact. But for now, we still have some show to get on with, so let's keep going. And once again, it is time to return to our recurring section, funding website things. And we are starting again on Crowd Supply with yet another Arduino-based gaming board. Now, I know we've had a few of these over the previous weeks, but stay with me, this one has some history. Because way back in 2011, the first iteration of the Gameduino came out, which was designed to work with VGA monitors. So this isn't a new project by any means. This is something that has been iterated over for a very, very long time. And the latest one is the Gameduino 3, also known as the Dazzler. And it does appear to be a pretty dazzling thing. It's got a GPU, it's got an FPGA, it's got HDMI out, along with Python support for gaming and various audio-visual things. And it really appears to be, well, fantastic. I mean, I can't think of any other thing quite like it in terms of it working with Arduinos, but having so much onboard power that it can quite comfortably output 720p or even video at 30 frames per second, which is what they're claiming here. And with a project that has been going on for so long, there is no reason in my mind to think that this thing hasn't been thoroughly tested and isn't, yeah, just fantastic. It really does seem like out of all of the different gaming-related Arduino things that I've covered recently, this one certainly is the most powerful. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the best. That's all down to what you want. That's all down to what you want to make. I mean, as I said before, there's a particular reason I supported one of these handheld gaming devices because it just tickled me particularly. But this, if you already have an Arduino Uno, or as they are saying here, I think the one they ship with it is the Adafruit Metro M4. You can just get it up and running quite quickly. And another nice aspect of this is that this is another project which is completely open source and hackable. As it mentions here, everything from the PCB design, the Verilog code for the HDMI J1 CPU and the system peripherals, and the J1 CPU running on the FPGA, along with the firmware that drives the Dazzler's extra features, are all things that you can hack. It has a JTAG port and a UART header, and yeah, it just seems pretty well put together. I know I've said that already, but I can't really get away from the fact that these people have been working on a product like this for 9 years now. And that's a long time to put into these kind of ideas, and this really does seem like quite the step up. In terms of programming, they have their own Gameduino library, which works with Arduino and also CircuitPython, with a bunch of examples. One of the interesting choices I thought with this was the addition of input slots for Wii Classic controllers. Now, I've got nothing against the Wii Classic controller, but I'm not going to lie, until today I didn't actually know what one was. I know the Wii came with the nunchuck and the other thing that you do the thing and the thing with, and I've owned one or two of those to try and hack them over the years. The Wii Classic controller itself was something I wasn't familiar with particularly, but I guess there's a good reason why they chose that controller. But having looked them up, you can get generic Wii Classic controllers for very cheap. It's not particularly a problem. Just like I said, to me, it seemed like an odd decision. That said, it doesn't particularly matter, because the Dazzler Python game pack, which is one of the levels you can support this at, comes with the Arduino Metro M4, which is already loaded with the Gameduino library. And that is an Uno clone that you can program using CircuitPython. And again, as I've probably said many times on this show, Python is a fantastic language to get people interested in programming, because it is just so much more forgiving and human readable than the alternative. At the other end of the scale, if you like the idea of this, but you just wanted the actual core system that they've created, they do have the Core Pack, which is 3 of these sort of system on module things, which are actually kind of reminiscent of boards like the NVIDIA Jetson Nano or the Google Coral Dev board. That just are these system chips that slot onto the top of a breakout board. And as it says here, there is one breakout board that comes with it. And yeah, this is a very compelling little idea. If you did actually want to just get into the general embedded GPU and FPGA world, which is a sentence that terrifies me as someone who doesn't have the time. But yeah, it really does seem like they've covered this from every single angle. And I will, of course, link in the description of the video so you can come and read through this entirely. There's a lot of information here about it, and it does seem like a fantastic project and not just another Arduino-based retro gaming handheld console. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Keep them coming. The more the better. I love them. I do. I really do. There's just a lot. But a lot is not bad. But there's a lot. It's not bad. A lot. What is wrong with me? At the time of making this video, they are just over $3,000 into their $10,000 funding goal. And as I mentioned, there is a couple of other options if you do want to support them. If you just like the shield itself, which will work with any Arduino Uno, you don't necessarily have to have the Metro M4. You can get that for just $39. And the Python game pack we looked at just before is $89, which of course adds the Adafruit Metro M4 board, along with a pair of Wii Classic controllers and a micro SD card. And the core pack for $99, which gives you 3 of those cores, which, to be honest, seems pretty cheap in general, actually, for a GPU and an FPGA on a board. I don't know, yeah, I don't know enough about it, but given the cost of some FPGA development boards, that's pretty cool, I think, yeah. Just before moving on, X-Camera, who made the Gameduino 3X Dabbler? Just before moving on, X-Camera, who made the Gameduino 3X Dazzler, have a website which has just a bunch of kind of interesting stuff on it. It's worth having a little dig through and see if there's anything that catches your eye. In the process of looking this up and kind of trying to jog my memory about Gameduino, because I was familiar with it at some point in the past, came across this reasonably speedy Python ray tracer, which just walks you through how to use a ray tracer that they've made in Python, which is, as they say, reasonably speedy. And it's exactly the kind of thing I find fascinating, and I'm very glad that someone else is writing this stuff so I can get a bit of an understanding about it without having to go through the weeds and learn it all myself. And now over on Kickstarter, Hat Rack, which is a DIN rail mount for Raspberry Pi hats. Now, to paraphrase their launch video, Raspberry Pi hats are great, but their stackable nature can also be a bit of an issue. If you want to get at something in the middle of the stack, for example, that could be a problem. So this reason, along with a few other reasons, is why they came up with this idea of a hat rack, which is a DIN rail mount for Raspberry Pi hats. And so the Pi ends up on one end, and you have this kind of quite nice looking circuit board here, which essentially just daisy chains the hats side by side. And because of the nature of the way that they're created, they are extendable. So you could have a whole line of these with different hats on them. And another nice feature is they are, of course, DIN rail mountable, which means that you can mount them alongside your other home automation things, or anywhere that you'd find a DIN rack in a network cabinet or anything like that. The home automation side of it really appeals to me, actually. I like the idea of just having a DIN rack with all of these hats there that you can interact with individually without having to dive into the stack. This is an interesting one for me because I think this is a fantastic idea. I haven't actually got a huge amount of Raspberry Pi hats as it happens. I've got 2 or 3, but I've mostly just worked with completely separate components and wired them up myself. That was my entry into it. I was always the how the hell do I attach these things together, give me a massive box of wires type of learner than someone that used hats. But that doesn't mean that this isn't something that isn't a good idea. In fact, I think for many other people, this might actually get Raspberry Pi hats that they don't use anymore for exactly the reason that it's just stuck in the middle between 2 things when you need more than one, or it won't fit into the network rack or wherever they want to put it. The kind of thing that would stop them using those Pi hats in the first place. So yeah, this is a lovely idea. It is already completely smashed its goal of 1,000 euros. They're 1,600 euros in with 10 days to go. A nice thing about this project though is that you don't have to pledge much to get something out of it. The original PCB boards, which don't have any parts in them, are only £12, but incredibly the actual populated ones are only £16. Now I know that these are obviously boards without many components on them, so of course they're going to be cheap, but I was still somewhat surprised that you can get this so cheap. So yeah, there'll be a link to this in the description, and if you are the kind of person who uses Pi hats and has been struggling with exactly this problem, it looks like this project has been thought up exactly for you. And before closing out the show this week, I wanted to put in a couple of things that didn't really fit anywhere else in the show, but I wanted to talk about them anyway. You may have noticed on the Electromaker channel that I made an advert for the new Electromaker store. They asked me if I could put something together, and of course I was happy to. But in looking through the shop, my eyes fell on something that I had completely forgotten about, and that is the Udo Bolt gear. Now, this is a kind of unique little single board computer. Although unique isn't the wrong word, there are other computers that do actually sort of do what it does, but it is very compelling. And I did actually cover this way back in May. I wrote a midweek roundup article, which was sort of the text version of this show before it started. And I covered it then, and it's got, you know, a pretty powerful AMD processor in there. It can support up to 32 gigs of RAM. It's a dual DDR, dual DDR, 2 DDR4 dual channel sockets, I said. And it's about $500, $415. So on the surface, it's just a powerful mini PC. That's cool. That's exactly the kind of box that I would want to buy. Stick Linux on it and make it do absolutely everything for me in the background. What I had forgotten is that it also has the ATmega32U4 chip in it, which is, say it with me, the same chip you find in the Arduino Leonardo and the Arduino Pro Mini. It is fantastic that it is just in there. I don't know why that tickled me so much. And I know there are other boards that do this. I know there was something we looked at relatively recently on the show that the name escapes me, that has an STM32 built into the motherboard, but its name escapes me. But yeah, that is kind of cool in and of itself. The other thing I had forgotten is that it has Grove connectors. And I'm really starting to get into the idea of Seed Studio's Grove connected systems. I have said in the past a few times that I don't like it when you can just click things together. You should learn how to use a breadboard, and I'm beginning to realize that that isn't necessarily the most helpful thing in the world for some people. I still advise anyone who wants to get into this to at very least have an Arduino and just a pile of components and a breadboard and some wires and try it that way as well. But I do understand that not everyone has the time nor the patience for that. And the fact that it works with Grove connectors, which same thing that works here, they are on the bottom of the Wii terminal. And a few weeks ago we featured a video from Not Enough Tech, who's a regular watcher of ours, showing off a project using this. Those same connectors you will find on the back of this mini PC. I just wanted to kind of reiterate the fact that this is out there. The original Maker update article I wrote is still available on the Electromaker site, although I don't think it's got necessarily the most information, as I was writing this before it was released, using their pre-release information. But I just wanted to let you guys know that that's something that I noticed this week and had been, kind of thinking about and sort of blown away by. I'd love to get my hands on one of these, and maybe I will at some point. Just before closing out this week, I want to talk about a recent video from Andreas Spiess, who is an absolute authority on everything to do with embedded and sensor-based working. And yeah, for the Maker community, he's just wonderful. I can't think of anyone who's taught me more than Andreas. And he's revisiting an idea that he had, which was the ESP32 board versus the STM32 board for makers. As some of his subscribers pointed out, it's not really fair to compare the two boards that he did, and so this is him returning to the idea. So the 25-minute long video covers a huge amount, including an overview of the STM32 chips and some of the history behind it. And as it says here, of course, a surprise. One of the things I found super interesting from my perspective is that I wasn't really aware that there's a big difference in the compatibility of some of the cloned STM32 boards you can get for cheap from China. I have a bunch of these blue pill boards sitting around that I've been playing with on and off, mostly just trying to, for now, use them as I would as Arduinos, using the STM32 or STM Arduino library, whatever it is called. And I've had relative success sometimes, and sometimes I haven't. Although I have been using a different bootloader on this particular one, which is something I'll go into in a different time. But he basically goes into the difference between that and these more official STM32 Nucleo boards. And this is the one that I haven't been playing with as much, mostly because it's such a different way of working. I wanted to do this the STM way, which is why I downloaded the STM Cube 32 IDE or whatever it is called, and started fiddling with that. And yeah, that's a bit of a longer path. That's something that's going to take me a bit more time. But out of the two, he was saying that this is probably actually a better shout than one of these, despite this costing a bit more. And then there are the other boards, which are the black pill boards out of China, which are the same form factor as these, although the PCB is black, which appear to be, if you just want to get a cheap and small board, probably the best. But rather than hear that from me, I would advise you to instead go through this video from Andreas, because as well as all of the examples that he gives for speed tests and how it works and how easy it is to work with, there's some fascinating stuff about the history of computing here, and including some stuff that he was involved in personally way back in the 80s. But rather than go into all of that myself, I just suggest you go and look at the video. As always, it is a fantastic video. And just to remind you, Andreas Spies is one of the YouTubers that has decided not to put mid-roll ads in his videos. I know YouTube changed the way they did stuff relatively recently, and a lot of people are annoyed by it. And a number of YouTubers have decided that rather than annoy people by having ads show up at random in the middle of their videos, they would just turn them off, taking presumably somewhat of a financial hit. So yeah, just another reason to love Andreas, and there'll be a link to this video in the description of this video. And that was our show. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for joining me. The Electromaker Show comes out every single week, and if you are enjoying the show, consider liking it, consider subscribing or sharing it with your friends, all of that YouTube stuff. And of course, every comment gets you entered into the mystery box competition for the following week. But for now, I hope you have a fantastic week, stay healthy, stay creative, and I'll see you in the next show.